everyone, and welcome to today's episode. We are going to have a lot of fun today because we're going to be talking about selling your own homegrown and homemade products. And we are joined today by Lisa Kivirist, who is one of the co-authors of the newly revised and updated Homemade for Sale: How to Set Up and Market a Food Business from Your Home Kitchen. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Hey, thanks for the invitation, Deborah.
It's so fun to see you again, even if it's just on Zoom.
I know.
We used to be at the
way back.
like all the way back to like what 2010, the very first Mother Earth News Fair ever.
Probably.
Yeah, so it's really fun to have you on today's show and to talk about your latest book. I remember when the first edition came out, and I was really excited about that. That's when the whole idea of cottage food was still pretty new. Not every state even had a cottage food law. So before we get any farther, there may be some people listening who don't know what we're talking about when we say cottage food laws. So can you just explain that?
You bet. And this is really the newest, oldest thing, because isn't it the oldest thing of making something on your homestead, on your farm, in your home kitchen, and selling it to your neighbor, right? It's community commerce at its finest. However, in the United States, especially about 100 years ago, we started becoming more regulated as a food system, which in some cases is great. I want my meat regulated and other things like that, and no child labor, that sort of thing. But in the meantime, we sort of made a lot of things illegal that are perfectly safe and should still continue for multiple reasons. And one of those things are what are called non-hazardous products. So these are the shelf-stable foods, the things that, imagine you could bring it to your farmer's market and put it on your table all afternoon and it's fine. So we can go more into that, but these are the basic, cookies, breads, jams, jellies, that sort of thing. So cottage food law, these are state-specific laws. So wherever you may be in the United States, you will have a law. That's the difference than when the book first came out in 2015. Not all states allowed cottage food, but now they do, and more opportunities are growing. So every state has their own law, and that will specifically say what you can sell, how much money you can make, where you can sell your products. The products need to be sold within your own state borders as things stand now, but direct to your customer is an important aspect. So it's not wholesale or retail. Small scale businesses, things that you can get started from your home kitchen. But that's the key, is your home kitchen. You don't need a commercial kitchen or commercial licensing or all of the costs and time that goes into things like that. You can literally get started almost overnight with your business. So that's what we talk about with cottage food products. And we are talking about products in the sense of you go to the grocery store and you buy a jar of pickles, right? That's a food product. So it's something like that that someone would buy and then use in their home or however they decide to use it. It's not food service. So for example, that jar of pickles, I can sell you the whole jar of pickles, but if I crack it open and put one on a stick, or I'm from Wisconsin, let's fry it, right? And sell it to you, that's food service, totally different category. Food products are generally in this country regulated by the Department of Agriculture in your state. Food service by the Department of Health, much different and more complicated in the sense that we're talking like restaurants, catering companies, that sort of thing. So basic food products, but a lot of opportunity again. And the most exciting thing, and what got my husband, John Ivanko, and I jazzed for the second edition, is so much has happened in the last couple of years with laws expanding, especially under the pandemic. It may be one of the few blessings of COVID, but because a lot of people were at home and people lost jobs, particularly in the food service area, people started thinking, hey, what do I really want to do? And how can I do that? And discovered opportunity under cottage food. So you saw thousands of businesses surging overnight from home kitchens. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. But it's really something broader and bigger than just making money out of your home kitchen. As I was saying, selling items to your local neighbor, it builds community. Starting your own business and going from giving away those cookies every holiday season, right, to selling them, goes from hobbyist to food entrepreneur overnight. And Deborah, the value of running your own business, right? And there's a lot that goes into that and a lot that comes out of that, even more importantly. So it's a real exciting new path for folks to consider.
Yeah. And could you talk a little bit about what hazardous foods are and things that you can't sell from your home kitchen? Because I know a lot of people who have goats want to sell cheese. What's the difference between like a custard pie and an apple pie?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And can get into the science weeds quickly, the food science weeds. However, in general, like I was saying, it's things that are shelf stable. So the majority of cookies, the majority of breads, anything that is dehydrated or dried herbs, for example, roasted coffee, dried noodles, those sort of things are pretty obviously non-hazardous. In general, things that would go in the refrigerator obviously would be. So anything like cheese, or your question about pie is a really good one, because people often ask a general category, can I make pie? And I always say it depends. It depends on the recipe itself, but also the ingredients. So it isn't even a one size fits all, like, can I use sour cream in my baked good? Well, maybe if it's in a bread and it's baked and that item is still shelf stable, great. But sour cream pie, that kind of thing, a sour cream cherry pie, which is delicious, would be hazardous. Same with a custard. But you mentioned apple. That's really interesting. Most traditional fruit pies, like an apple pie, a cherry pie, a blueberry pie, are perfectly non-hazardous because of the sugar in it. And usually there's a little bit of citric acid too, lemon juice. So the sugar works as a preservative. So it's interesting because sometimes people look at it and they say, oh, it has to be dry. And I'm like, cherry pie is not dry. It's not that. It's just what the end product is. There is a lab test folks can do if they're ever wondering about something. There's a water activity of 0.85 or less and a pH level that makes these things work. And now I'm really in the science weeds. But in most states, there's great support within Extension or your Department of Ag, and just call them if you're wondering about a product and they can help assure that it's safe. But a lot of things, bottom line, are under that umbrella of products you can sell.
Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit more about where you can sell your products? I know in Illinois, when we first got our cottage food law passed, it was only at farmers markets, which sounded so ridiculous. It's like, oh, so it's legal to sell these things at a farmer's market, but nowhere else? So can you talk a little bit about where it's legal to?
Yeah, that was a challenge in a lot of states. It's changing pretty much now, where there's no reason to restrict a market in the sense of it's the same product, right? My chocolate chip cookies are fine if I sell them 10 cookies or 100 cookies. It's the same cookie, right? So one thing to keep in mind is that the sale needs to take place in your own state, so not interstate sales. The state of sale has to take place in your own state, in that our farm is literally the first road over the border from Illinois. So somebody could drive here and buy our stuff, but I can't go to an Illinois market, for example. And most importantly, it needs to be sold direct to the customer. So the end user is your purchaser. So no wholesale, retail, that sort of thing. But I say that with a caveat, and this again got us really jazzed with the second edition, is things are changing. There are a number of states that are allowing wholesale out-of-home kitchens, and there's this whole movement now called food freedom, where you see increasing numbers of states allowing items that would be hazardous. I know I said non-hazardous, and that's the safe common denominator for all of us talking today. But increasingly, states are allowing that. Wyoming, Montana, California, which clearly opens up a whole lot more opportunity. There may be more regulations. You may have a kitchen inspection. There may be more rules to follow in that sense, understandably. But things are really moving in this direction. And that's super exciting, because that could open up, already has opened up for some places, opportunity to do more foods, to do meals, that sort of thing. So we can talk about the general things that everybody can do right now, but it's a super exciting time. So directly to your customer, but like you were talking about, farmers markets are a great opportunity to sell products. It's a great opportunity to test products, in the sense of if you're getting up and running and you don't know what's really going to sell, you can just make a couple of batches of something and say, hey, did this work? Did this not work? So they're always a good opportunity. Winter markets especially are always, of course, lacking in fresh produce, at least here in the Midwest. So these kind of items are exceptionally sought out and valued, but that's the key to customer. How your customer uses it, they can't resell it. But for example, if you're a wedding cake maker, and you sell the wedding cake direct to the bride, they want to serve it at their wedding, assuming the venue's okay with that, totally fine.
Oh, very interesting about selling it to the bride and then she can serve it to other people.
Yeah. There's a lot of creativity in the cottage food space, still perfectly legal. I mentioned you can't do food service, for example. Okay, you couldn't take your cake to the market and slice it and put it on a plate with a fork and serve it. Fair enough, but you're putting a couple of cookies in a bag and selling those, or cake pops or something as a single serving. Sure, I would bet money that none of those make it home from the market, but that's, again, totally fine. You can't anybody could eat it anywhere. It just can't literally be food service.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier something about 10 cookies or 100 cookies. And that made me think about the fact that I know, like with eggs, which are hazardous, but when we sell eggs, up to a certain amount is one kind of license. And once you're selling more, it's another kind of license. Are there some states that do limit how much you can sell before you are no longer under the cottage food law?
Yeah, that's a great question, Deborah. So that's what's referred to as your gross sales cap. So it's your total amount of money you bring in, right, before you deduct expenses or anything like that. And interesting, when book Homemade for Sale first came out in 2015, there were a lot of states that had a gross sales cap of 10,000, 5,000, 15,000. But it really doesn't make a difference when you think about it, in that it's the same product, right? And whether I sell 1 jar of my pickles or 100 jars, it's not a food safety issue. So now, increasingly, over 25 states do not have any gross sales cap, meaning you can earn as much as you want out of your kitchen. Now, Florida just increased their gross sales cap to 250,000. That's a lot of pickles. And I don't know anybody who's honestly reached that. But the point is, you really have a lot of room to expand. And then when I say expand, it's interesting because the majority of cottage food businesses are A, women run, B, they're small scale, and intentionally so, right? So you could dial it up, you could dial it down whenever you want. You're not investing in anything. You're not paying rent for a storefront every month, right? So a lot of times folks will amp something like this up at the holiday season when people might be looking for baked goods, for example, or specialty items. Or you could be doing canning of your produce the whole summer long, your high acid items. And by high acid canned items, I mean the safer canned items. So these are things like the pickles, the salsas, jams and jellies, that sort of thing. Typically, states are required to use approved recipes for your canned items, which basically just means tested recipes. Anything from Extension, anything from like the Ball canning book. But just because it was grandma's salsa recipe doesn't necessarily mean it meets safety standards by today, because she probably had totally different tomatoes, right? But you could be making those during the course of the year and selling them into the fall or the following season. So you really can experiment and see. We write in the book, we have a whole section now on burnout, which is a bigger issue because it's very easy to take on too much, right? And to overcommit. And these things take time to make. That's sort of the whole point too, in that we are selling handcrafted products, right? This isn't mass marketed. We're not competing with the mass industrial grocery stores and what their pricing is on their shelf. These are specialty items made by you, and you have the right, and I would argue the duty as an entrepreneur, to try to keep things in balance so that it's both income generating and also still fun and enjoyable for you.
So one of the things that popped into my head when you said that Florida now has a cap of $250,000 is that I can't imagine how anybody could make that much in their home kitchen. So do they define home kitchen? Like, does it have to be the kitchen in your house? Like, what if you built like a freestanding kitchen on your farm somewhere else? At that point, would it have to go and meet the rules for a commercial kitchen since it's a separate structure?
Yeah, it depends. In general, it means your home kitchen in that sense. You can't rent a kitchen and use cottage food law in there for that example. But there have been situations where people have built kitchens. Typically by that time, if you're going to invest in building a kitchen, people do commercial kitchens because their volume is that high. And once you're commercial, of course, there's advantages. You can do wholesale. You can do other things as well. There are people I've known who have, for example, done their cottage food operation, built a kitchen in their basement or something like that. Those would be questions for your own local health department on what their requirements might be or if that is feasible. But there are a lot of cottage food entrepreneurs who are very good at organization and how to do that. There's a section in the book as that as well. So it's really getting in a different mindset. And this can be a bit of a learning curve. It was for me, in that your home kitchen is your home kitchen, right? It's where you make supper. It's where you do your fun baking and all of that. And all of a sudden, it is now your business space. So in some states, there are specific course you might need to take online on food safety. A couple states do have a food inspection required. Really no big deal, just the fact that you are producing safely, cleanliness, all of that sort of stuff. But it often helps to get into a business zone when you are producing your cottage food products, in the sense of don't be combining with making dinner or snacks for the kids or other things. Go into your zone, use your time effectively, amp up all of your food safety procedures and all of that. And that will help create that separation. But speaking of that separation, that's often a new challenge for folks. I know even who are running homesteading businesses of any kind for the first time, or if somebody jumps into a cottage food business, and again, they've been giving away those beautiful cupcakes and now they're selling them, is to really start thinking like an entrepreneur, in the sense of tracking your expenses, right? And tracking your miles to do a delivery, or taking a class in cake decorating, whatever it may be. All of those things that you used to save up or put on your Christmas Santa wish list are now legitimate expenses. And again, that's really empowering, but it's a whole other set of skill sets to learn in conjunction when you launch. And the book goes into that as well, Homemade for Sale, because in that case, it's basically, business startup 101, whether you're starting a bookstore or a cupcake business, right? It's how you run your business, how you manage your accounts, making a profit. And that's key, because again, if you've always been giving something away, it may feel different, even uncomfortable to charge for something, but that's super important. And we as cottage food entrepreneurs, our community, again, we're not competing with the mass market, charge fairly. And that is often a real struggle for cottage food entrepreneurs, because it's often not valuing our own product enough, which I could argue against. It's trying to be more accessible and affordable, and this isn't necessarily going to be for everybody. Don't get nickeled and dimed. Stick with your pricing, especially in today's era of inflation, with ingredient costs that you do need to purchase going up. It needs to be tracked, and make sure it's all worth your time.
That's awesome advice. I know somebody posted on our Facebook group a couple of weeks ago. She was trying to decide what to price a product, and she's like, I don't want to make a ton of money. I want to be fair to people. And I responded and said, that sounds really nice on the surface, but at some point you're going to get tired and you're going to start to feel resentful for not getting paid, for all the work that you're putting into what you're selling. So thank you for mentioning
that. Is really
that.
good advice. No, and good for you for giving that out, because it doesn't help anybody if we as a community of farmers, of homesteaders, of cottage food entrepreneurs underprice our products, because it's only hurting, again, other people who are selling things, right? And you and I both know we so undervalue as a society food in our country. And we are so used to cheap food, and that has to change if we're going to be sustainable in any matter. And it starts in how we treat ourselves as a business and how we price things. We do have much more detail in the book on pricing. There's different approaches people can take, input calculators. There's different ways, depending what you're doing, to really look at those costs and your time and make sure it's a profitable item.
Right. Yeah. Now, if you buy a jar of pickles at the store or a bag of cookies or something, there's going to be a label on there with ingredients and nutritional info and super complicated. So could you talk a little bit about what kind of packaging and labeling is required for people who are selling under the cottage food laws?
You bet. Yep. Super simple and important. So every state will have its own regulations. So check with your state. Every state will have some form of line, literally a couple sentences that you need to put on your product that says something to the effect of, this was not made in a commercially licensed kitchen. And that, I think, is really good. It's transparent, right? It sometimes sounds a little legalese or not particularly pretty, but I say celebrate it, because everything else people are buying is so industrialized and out of factories. This is really the one last option, right? To truly buy something homemade. Labels will also typically require your name, the business name, and some way to contact you. Sometimes it's your address or a website or something like that. And that is really, again, going back to the transparency aspect, because true, even if you buy something off the shelf, that jar of pickles in a grocery store, there's a tracking mechanism. If anything was ever wrong with that, or, we've seen peanut butter outbreaks recently, things can be tracked back. So it's there for food safety purposes, but I would argue even a better reason is marketing. So hopefully they love whatever they bought at market, and I want to get more of these. How can they get in touch with you? How can they find out how to do more with that. And your label can also look pretty. I'm always off on, like, especially when we bring things to farmers markets, it just shouldn't look like it came off of your dot matrix printer and taped on, right? So there are a lot of programs out there. We talk about some in the book, be it through Avery Labels or others, where you can easily graphically, even if you're not a graphic person like me, design something really interesting and pretty that enhances your product. There's also some interesting ways to really showcase the fact that it's homemade. One thing that I do when I do our jams and jellies and pickles and bread, I do some Latvian rye bread, is I'm making a finite batch, right? There's not that many. And to look at your product really as a fine art product, a fine piece of art. So if I have 6 loaves of bread I'm bringing to the market, I'll have my labels literally hand write on it, 1 out of 6, 2 out of 6, 3 out of 6, just like that print, right? Because it's true. There's a limited batch. There's only so many. And it's interesting because I feel like with Cottage Food, the more authentic we are about what we're making and the stories behind them, the better we can market them, because that's what people want, right? So I mentioned my Latvian sourdough. Latvia is where my mom's from. Estonia is my dad, and the Baltics, where rye bread is like a religion, right? So I just grew up with this. I make these sourdough rye breads. I'd argue it's a good bread, but it's also a very unique bread. I don't know where you could buy those, period. And that's where you see a lot of interesting cultures represented in Cottage Foods. You know, those recipes we've been passed down that would never make it into a mass market store. But yeah, you can make small batches and you could sell those. And that uniqueness goes a long way, sharing your story. Where did this come from? Why is it important to you in selling your product?
Awesome. So I happen to notice that your book also mentions that you should do a zoning check, which kind of surprised me because I'm like, what? If there you have a cottage food law, that means you can do this out of your home kitchen. So what does zoning have to do with it?
Well, most of your listeners, probably like you and I, live on farms, and we're like, zoning what? You know, I mean, either it's ag or rural or whatnot. But for folks who are particularly in urban areas or suburban areas, there can be some regulations on home-based businesses. They can't legally isolate cottage food and say, well, you can't do your cupcake business. But there might be some restrictions on home businesses in general. It's just something you want to check out, make a couple phone calls before you get up and running, and anything could be an issue there. So what's interesting is, increasingly, not surprisingly, since COVID, there have been some really old laws on the books that restricted home businesses of various sorts, even in ag places, ag areas. But since everybody was doing this during the pandemic, and a lot of people are still doing it in various capacities, that these laws are finally catching up. My own county here, very rural, very dairy county in southern Wisconsin, just updated their zoning code last year to legally allow home businesses on farms that are unrelated to agriculture. And in this case, in most places where you live, if you live on a farm, it's pretty conventional agriculture. When they say agriculture, they don't mean making pickles out of my cucumbers. You know, it's like acres of soybean or alfalfa, right? So things are catching up, most definitely. But again, a couple quick phone calls just to double check.
Okay, great. Another thing too that I think some people might be not clear on is that this doesn't just give you free reign to do it all without getting any additional license or training or certification or anything like that. I remember a few years ago, a friend of mine wanted to have a cottage food business, and so she had to do the food manager certification in Illinois to be able to do that legally.
Yep.
So is that kind of typical for most states that you have some training?
Yeah, most states will have a registration, meaning you just need to register with the state. So they have a list of all the cottage food producers. Not a big deal. There may be a small fee with that, but it's not an insurmountable thing. To your point, there may be some training that you need to go through. So it's, in most cases, not literally something you can like start overnight, but there are a few barriers, and I'd argue there really should not be barriers. And if you encounter barriers, ask questions, because that's not what it's intended for. You know, the sense of there shouldn't be exorbitant fees. They shouldn't be treating this like commercial licensing, because it's not. So yeah, definitely ask some questions. And I think this is pretty obvious, but it sometimes gets lost, is you still are a legitimate business. Sometimes people, again, if you're just so used to making something in your kitchen and giving it away, you are a legitimate business, as we were just talking about. You need to be tracking your expenses and your income. Think about insurance, because even though we are talking very safe products, that's still a smart thing to have, or at least consider and research. Do you want to be a sole proprietor or an LLC or a subchapter S? All of these things do take time in that sense. So it's important to look that through. So both hopefully the Homemade for Sale book will be a resource, and some other things too that will help folks is coming up. I'm excited. Next April 10th to the 13th is the second now home-based virtual food entrepreneur national conference in the virtual space. So that is being hosted by the nonprofit Renewing the Countryside. We did the pilot back in 2021, and we had over 900 people attend. So there's definitely a need and an interest, and that's really a great forum to learn from people in other states. It's interesting because it's really grown to a super collaborative community within cottage food entrepreneurs, because we're not competing against each other, really, in the sense that we're all spread out geographically, we're spread out in different states, we're all focused on our own local communities. So you see a lot of recipe sharing, marketing tip sharing, et cetera, and support and rallying and saying, you can do this. So yeah, the national conference is a great way. We're going to create a forum for people to come together and really, really share.
Oh, that sounds like so much fun. And yeah, you're totally right. That's why I tell people, like, I've always been more than willing to teach people how to make goat milk soap and to make their own cheese and that kind of stuff, because there's no way that any of us are going to have a market big enough to cut into each other's business. Like, we're just not going to get that huge.
I love it. And it's so funny because that really defies traditional business models, right? If you went to talk to a business professor at the university and you're like, why would you give your recipe to somebody starting out? Why would you share your top tips, et cetera? But it's really because of that sharing that this whole community of cottage food entrepreneurs nationally has grown so much. And one thing we haven't talked about, this is not necessarily everybody's dream, nor should be your dream, but there are a fair segment of cottage food entrepreneurs where their dream is to go retail, go wholesale. And a lot do, if that's where you want to go, but to do it in such a way with such training wheels, if you will, that you could have a successful business up and running and then go to bricks and mortar with rent and staff and all sorts of other expenses, you're really setting yourself up to succeed much better. So that is an option and opportunity for anyone as well.
That is super exciting. Yeah. One of the things too, I wanted to share a quick story, because I noticed your book, you also mentioned get a state sales tax license. I mean, there may be people who read it and think, oh, I probably don't need to do all these things right away, but you never know. You just never know who might get mad at you. And I have a friend who has a farm down the road, and she was selling goat milk soap at farmers markets and crafts fairs and stuff. And somebody got mad at her for some reason. We don't know why, but they called the state and said, this woman is selling goat milk soap and not charging sales tax. And she had someone show up on her farm from the state revenue department to investigate this complaint. Like, I don't understand why they had to come to her farm, because I mean, they nearly gave the poor woman a heart attack to have to go through like this hour-long interview. I mean, she was charging sales tax. Like I said, I don't know why they couldn't have checked that online, but you just never know when something like that could happen. So you got to make sure you're dotting all your I's and crossing the T's.
You bet. But you raised a really good point, Deborah. And this is actually a new section in the new edition of that community aspect. And for us not to be what I was writing as the cottage food police, right? In the sense of, we're all in this together, and most of the time, I'd argue all the time, probably your friend's time. It was just having conversations and asking questions, right? But we don't do that. We don't report our neighbor for doing something. We talk to them, we educate, we go through other means, because by doing that, it only hurts the whole community, right? It's just another thing that, whatever, we can't do this right because da-da-da-da. So yeah, keep asking questions. Don't snark on each other. It's not helping. But to your point, like about sales tax and things, yeah, there's a lot of those kind of logistics that needs to go into your business. You don't have to necessarily have every T crossed before you start, but have your basics. talk to other people, talk to other cottage food entrepreneurs. Sales tax is an interesting example because it varies so much. It varies by state if your product is taxed or not. It varies by category. Like, for example, sometimes the high acid canned items, the pickles and the baked goods, the breads don't have sales tax, but candy would as a confection. And even then, there's sort of categories within that that are or aren't. So it's a constant learning process. And I often say to folks, like, if all of this we're talking about, if you read Homemade for Sale and it really makes you overwhelmed and nervous, just take a step back for a minute, in the sense of, this is kind of life running a business, right? And you need to approach it in a careful but moving steady forward sort of way, right? And to get excited about it, to get excited about the fact that you are in control of these aspects, but you're also responsible. And too many times I see, particularly with most of these cottage food businesses run by women, we tend to, want to make sure everything's in line and everything's perfect. You're never going to have that with a business, right? We do our research, we do the best we can, and if something wasn't done perfectly, we fix it, right? I realize it's a broad net there, but there's a lot of things to learn and keep learning. I am for sure keep learning, and new products to try. Who knows, your state law may expand and allow more things, so that's another opportunity. So it's a constant good evolution.
Yeah. Well, I want to make sure we end on a positive note, because before we got started, one of the things you said to me that really stuck was that you wanted people to know just how easy it is to be able to start and run a business from your home. So I want to make sure that nobody feels overwhelmed by all the little things we mentioned here, and just give you this last opportunity to let people know how easy it is to do this.
Totally, Deborah. And especially with your listeners who are already most likely homesteaders. You are on your land, you are doing a lot of these things already. Running a cottage food business is really a natural next step in that it is small scale. Again, I keep going back, but it's in your home kitchen. There is no investment. You probably have all the equipment you need already to do this, right? So you're hitting the ground still running successfully. You've probably been already making the product, so you have that skill set down. And even if you've been giving it away to your families and friends locally, they're going to be your number one customer once you put out your shingle and start charging for that. And it's also a really practical way to diversify your income source. We all realize on homesteads, we don't do just one thing, right? And we typically don't have just one set of income coming in. And that's the whole point of modeling Mother Nature, right? She doesn't plant one seed. It's the same thing with cottage food. And it's a nice way to diversify your homestead income package. Experiment. If it doesn't work out for you, or it's just not working for whatever reason, totally okay. I always joke about it, but I was like, my one rule is never sell something as a cottage food product that your family won't eat. Because the worst case scenario is you just end up with leftovers, right? So I don't know. My boys are not too big of fans of my Estonian pickled pumpkin. It's a little bit unique taste, but I'll eat that. And by the way, that always sells out at the market because it's such a unique product. But especially during the winter months, or when you have a little bit of time to think and experiment a bit, do some research. Hopefully, Homemade for Sale will help there. I also have a longer 5-hour Udemy class that goes into more of the detail on this type of food business startup. So there's a ton of resources and a growing number of resources. Check with your state. Some states have wonderfully embraced this and have all kinds of training and resource people as well. So there couldn't be a better time to jump into cottage food, because a lot has been brewing over the last couple of years, the last 5 years especially, and it's only getting better.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. And can you
thank you so much.
Let people know where they can find you online?
Sure. Yep. So it's all off of our main site for the book, homemadeforsale.com, by myself and my husband, John Ivanko.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.